One of the most infamous tools Henry wielded was the Act of 6 Articles, a law that reinforced his religious supremacy. Anyone who publicly denied the royal supremacy of the king over the church could be charged with treason, a crime that carried one of the most brutal forms of punishment available to the monarch. The punishment for treason was public execution, often carried out in the most gruesome ways possible, such as hanging, drawing, and quartering, or being burned at the stake. These executions were designed not only to rid Henry of his enemies, but also to serve as a horrific warning to anyone who might consider challenging his rule. In Henry's England, accusations of heresy were just as dangerous as accusations of treason. With the establishment of the Church of England, those who adhered to the traditional Catholic faith were seen as enemies of the state. Heretics were often tortured to extract confessions or to reveal the names of others involved in heretical activities. The rack, a device that stretched the body to its breaking point, was one of the most feared instruments of torture during this time. This method of torture was often employed in the Tower of London, where individuals could be stretched beyond endurance until they were on the verge of death, all in the name of extracting information. But torture wasn't only used to gather confessions or to punish enemies of the state. It was also a tool for instilling fear in the general population. Henry understood that if people feared the punishment for even the slightest transgression, they would be far less likely to defy him. Thus, public executions became a spectacle, a display of the king's absolute power over life and death. These events were carefully orchestrated to ensure maximum humiliation for the condemned, with crowds gathering to witness the gruesome end of those who had fallen out of favor with the king. King Henry VIII's reign was one of the most tumultuous in English history, a time defined by sweeping religious changes, political upheaval, and a terrifying brutality that left a deep imprint on the lives of his subjects. While most are familiar with Henry's infamous 6 marriages, his break with Rome, and his larger-than-life personality, few are aware of the equally terrifying aspect of his reign: the torture laws that instilled fear across England. These laws weren't just about punishment, they were a political tool used by Henry to control, manipulate, and eliminate those who dared to challenge him. From the first days of his reign, Henry understood the power of fear. He realized that to maintain control over England, he needed not only to command loyalty but also to ensure that dissent was not only discouraged but eradicated. The laws and methods he put into place became instruments of terror that would haunt the lives of commoners and nobles alike. These laws were not just designed to punish, they were designed to break people, to make examples of them, and to send a clear message to anyone thinking of opposing Henry's rule. The Tudor king's approach to justice was anything but humane. He believed in the idea that fear was a potent weapon in governance, and the people of England quickly learned that defying the king's will came with a price that was often paid with unimaginable pain. These laws empowered Henry to use torture as a means of extracting confessions, securing his political position, and silencing anyone who dared question his authority. But it wasn't just the accused who suffered. Anyone associated with them could also fall victim to the king's wrath. As we reflect on this chapter of history, it's crucial to ask ourselves, what can we learn from the reign of a king who ruled through terror? How can we ensure that such power is never again used so recklessly? Henry VIII's reign teaches us the dangers of absolute power and the catastrophic effects of a government that uses fear as a tool of control. It reminds us that, while laws can shape a nation, they must always be used responsibly, with justice and fairness at their core, and never as a weapon to subjugate and terrorize a people. In the end, Henry VIII's reign offers us valuable lessons on the importance of checks and balances, the need for accountability and leadership, and the enduring truth that power, when misused, comes at an immense cost, not only to those who suffer under it, but to the very fabric of society itself. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the reign of King Henry VIII and the laws that terrorized England. If you found this video insightful, be sure to leave a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think of Henry's reign and the laws he enacted? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical content. We'll continue to explore the lives of the most influential and controversial figures in history, so stay tuned for more fascinating stories from the past. While Henry's reign may be remembered for its dynastic ambitions, its religious upheavals, and its extravagant displays of power, It is the cruelty of his legal system that stands as one of his most terrifying legacies. The laws that instilled fear in the hearts of his subjects were crafted not out of necessity, but out of a deep and often paranoid need for control. And in the end, these laws, as effective as they were in the short term, only served to deepen the division within his kingdom. Though Henry VIII is often remembered for his marriages and the break with Rome, his use of the law to terrorize his people, eliminate rivals, and suppress dissent is perhaps the darkest part of his reign. His ability to turn everyday citizens into enemies of the state, simply by accusing them of treason or heresy, ensured that fear permeated every level of society, from the highest court to the humblest peasant's cottage. And it's that fear, that constant dread of reprisal, that continues to resonate through the centuries. By the time of his death, Henry had succeeded in securing his throne through fear, but at what cost? His kingdom, riddled with political factions and deeply divided by his religious reforms, was left to pick up the pieces. His son, Edward VI, ascended the throne as a child, and the instability of his reign set the stage for future conflicts that would change the course of English history. But the legacy of Henry VIII, the fear he instilled, the lives he destroyed, and the laws he enacted to maintain his grip on power, remains a defining part of his story. However, the legacy of Henry's terror endured long after his death. The laws he enacted to maintain his power would continue to influence England for generations. The fear he instilled through his laws and punishments would leave an indelible mark on the English psyche. For centuries, Henry VIII would be remembered not only for his marriages and religious reforms but also for the reign of terror he unleashed through his ruthless use of the law. As we reflect on Henry's reign, it's important to recognize the cost of such power. While Henry was able to consolidate control over England through fear and intimidation, his reign also sowed the seeds of political instability that would lead to the English Civil War and the eventual overthrow of the monarchy. His legacy, marked by his brutal use of the law, serves as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating effects of a government that rules by fear. As we conclude our exploration of King Henry VIII's reign, it's clear that his legacy is one of both grandeur and terror. His ability to manipulate both the law and the people through fear has marked him as one of the most formidable and tyrannical figures in history. The torture laws he enacted were not just tools of governance. They were instruments of power, designed to control, subdue, and eliminate anyone who stood in his way. His reign serves as a stark reminder of how a monarch can wield the full force of the law to create an atmosphere of terror, silencing dissent, and stamping out opposition through brutal means. In addition to the laws related to treason, Henry also introduced legislation to control the lives of ordinary people. The Statute of Uses, for example, aimed to prevent landowners from transferring their estates to their heirs without paying taxes, effectively tightening Henry's control over England's nobility. Henry also used the law to regulate religious practices, pushing through laws that forbade Catholicism and mandated loyalty to the Church of England. The fear of Henry's laws extended far beyond the walls of the royal court. His legislation had a profound impact on the lives of everyday people. For example, the Act of Supremacy, which declared Henry the supreme head of the Church of England, had profound religious consequences. Those who refused to take the oath of supremacy were deemed traitors and subjected to severe punishment. Refusal to accept the king's authority could lead to excommunication, imprisonment, or execution. The terror that Henry's laws instilled in the population was compounded by the role of the Tudor secret police. The king's agents were everywhere, spying on citizens, reporting on their activities, and ensuring that his laws were strictly enforced. The role of informants and spies created an atmosphere where no one could be trusted. Henry's spies were known to infiltrate both public and private spaces, ensuring that no whispers of rebellion or dissent went unnoticed. Yet, despite the extreme measures Henry took to maintain control, his laws eventually began to erode his support. The brutality of his reign, combined with the instability caused by his constant shifting between religious factions, alienated many people. By the time of his death in 1547, Henry's grip on the kingdom was weakened, and the fear that had once been so potent had begun to dissipate. One of the most chilling aspects of Henry's reign was his ability to turn the law itself into a weapon. His use of the law to target individuals who could challenge his authority was particularly effective because it not only created fear but also confusion. People couldn't be sure of what would trigger an accusation of treason, and this uncertainty made it difficult for anyone to feel safe, no matter their position in society. The mere suspicion of disloyalty could lead to imprisonment, torture, and execution. The king's spies and informants were everywhere, watching, listening, and reporting on the most mundane of activities. One of the most famous victims of Henry's use of the treason laws was Anne Boleyn, his second wife, whom he had executed on charges of treason and adultery. Anne's death is a stark reminder of how Henry used the law to eliminate anyone he viewed as a threat to his power. Anne had once been the woman who captured Henry's heart, but after their marriage and the birth of a daughter, Elizabeth, Henry's affection for her waned. His obsession with securing a male heir overshadowed his love for Anne, and when rumors of her infidelity and treason spread, Henry wasted no time in using the full force of the law to dispose of her. Anne's execution, carried out in 1536, was an act of political brutality. Though the charges against her were flimsy and likely fabricated, Henry used the treason laws to justify her death. The public execution of Anne Boleyn was a reminder to everyone in the kingdom that even those closest to the king were not immune to his ruthless power. It also served as a warning to others. No one, not even a queen, was safe from the terror of the king's laws. Among the most notorious laws Henry introduced was the Treason Act of 1547, passed during his final years of life. This law extended the crime of treason to include any form of criticism against the king's government or its policies. It was a direct response to the growing opposition in his court, as powerful factions began jockeying for influence over his young son, Edward VI, who had been crowned king after Henry's death. This law was particularly feared because it didn't require an overt act of rebellion. Simply speaking out against the king or his policies could be grounds for execution. What made this law so terrifying was its reach and its vagueness. The Act of 1547 meant that anyone, noble or commoner, could be accused of treason for something as innocuous as a private conversation or a whispered remark. The law effectively placed everyone under suspicion, creating an environment where fear of reprisal kept many people silent, even those closest to the throne. During this time, Henry's health had continued to decline. He was no longer the vigorous young king who had once won battles, jousted, and dazzled his court with his charm. His body had grown obese, his legs rotted with ulcers, and his mind deteriorated, weighed down by the agony of his physical afflictions and the weight of his decisions. Yet, despite his physical and mental decline, Henry's iron grip on the law remained strong. His paranoia only increased, especially as he feared betrayal from those closest to him, including his advisors, ministers, and even members of his family. The king's declining health gave rise to an atmosphere of fear in the royal court, where survival often depended on keeping a low profile and avoiding suspicion. As we study the past, it's important to remember the lessons that history teaches us. The reign of Henry VIII serves as a stark reminder of what happens when fear is used as a tool of control, and when power is wielded without regard for the lives and dignity of those subject to it. As we delve deeper into Henry VIII's reign, it's essential to explore the personal side of this infamous king, the man who, despite his undeniable power and influence, became a figure of terrifying unpredictability. His rise to power had been dramatic, and his subsequent descent into a tyrant was marked by his intense obsession with securing his legacy. Henry's personal struggles, his battle with his health, his marriages, and his ultimate thirst for a male heir, directly influenced the laws and punishments he enacted during his rule. The laws that terrified England were not just a reflection of his political strategies, but also of his deeply personal insecurities. Henry's obsession with ensuring that his dynasty remained intact after his death was the driving force behind much of his brutal decision-making. As we know, his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon had produced no male heirs, a failure that haunted him for years. The need for a son, someone to carry on the Tudor name, became a primary focus of his life. The king's desperation for a male heir set the stage for a series of legal and personal actions that would shape the course of English history. and would lead to the brutal measures that terrorized the kingdom. This desperation culminated in his 6 marriages, but it also influenced his lawmaking. The king's paranoia about securing his throne led him to impose ever harsher punishments on those he believed threatened his rule. Anyone suspected of treason, whether for challenging his claim to the throne, opposing his religious reforms, or even questioning his personal decisions, could be subjected to torture, execution, or both. Yet, despite the king's efforts to maintain control through fear and terror, there were moments when the people of England rebelled against his iron grip. Some, like Thomas More, would rather die than bow to the king's will, refusing to betray their beliefs even in the face of certain death. Others would risk everything to challenge the monarch's oppressive laws, even if it meant suffering unimaginable pain or death. These acts of defiance served as reminders that even under the most oppressive regimes, the human spirit cannot be completely extinguished. The impact of Henry's laws on his reign was profound. While they helped him maintain control over England for a time, they also left a legacy of fear, violence, and suffering that would echo throughout English history. The people of England lived in constant terror, knowing that one false move could lead to imprisonment, torture, and execution. The laws enacted under Henry's rule would shape not only the history of England but also the future of the monarchy itself. As we reflect on the reign of Henry VIII, we must consider the terrible toll that his laws took on the people of England. The terror he instilled in his subjects was not only a reflection of his thirst for power but also a tragic reminder of the dangers of absolute rule. History teaches us that when fear becomes a tool of governance, the cost to humanity can be catastrophic. Henry VIII's reign was a time of great change, both politically and socially. His laws were a reflection of the growing power of the monarchy and the king's unyielding desire to control every aspect of life in England. His legacy, while undoubtedly marked by his marriages and religious reforms, is also deeply entwined with the legacy of fear and suffering that his torture laws brought to the people of his kingdom. One of the most notable examples of Henry's use of torture and execution was his treatment of the Catholic bishops who refused to accept his authority as head of the Church of England. In 1535, he executed 2 of the most prominent Catholic figures in England, Sir Thomas More, the former Chancellor, and Bishop John Fisher. Both men were offered the chance to save their lives by swearing allegiance to Henry's religious reforms. Both refused. Their executions were carried out with brutal efficiency. More was beheaded, and Fisher was imprisoned for a year before being executed by hanging. Their deaths were meant to send a message not only to the Catholic Church but to anyone who dared oppose the king. While Henry's reign was marked by the terror of public executions, the threat of torture also loomed over anyone who could be accused of treason or heresy. The law allowed for the king to arrest, imprison, and torture anyone he deemed a threat to his authority. This gave Henry unprecedented control over his subjects. Even within his court, anyone who suspected another of treason could easily have them arrested and tortured into confession. The king's spies, ever vigilant, kept watch over both the common folk and his nobility. To be accused of anything was to risk imprisonment, torture, and possibly death. But the law wasn't the only force working to suppress dissent. Henry VIII's infamous secret police, known as the Court of Augmentations, were instrumental in enforcing his brutal laws. The Court of Augmentations was tasked with ensuring that the king's will was carried out with ruthless efficiency. It was a court that operated with absolute secrecy, and its agents were feared across the land. Their job was to hunt down anyone suspected of treason or heresy and make sure that those accused were punished, whether that meant imprisonment, torture, or execution.